were never meant to hear this. Not now. Not ever. What I'm about to tell you is something most men go their entire lives without even brushing against. A story buried beneath silence, fear, and blood. And if you are listening to this now, it means you've already stepped off the path of the ordinary. You've already crossed the line into forbidden ground. So listen carefully, because once you hear this, you cannot go back. In the rolling wilderness of Tennessee, 1837, there was a valley the maps refused to name. A valley where crops never failed, where children were born perfect, where disease passed over as if the very air was sacred. But within that valley lived 7 women, women who had not aged a single day in living memory. The people called them the Beaumont sisters. Others whispered the word witch, but neither label was true. These were not simply women, and what bound them to that valley was not magic. It was something older, darker, and infinitely hungrier. Imagine this. Every man and woman around you wears time on their face like a brand. Wrinkles, scars, calluses, every soul bent beneath the brutality of frontier life. And then there are 7. 7 who are flawless, year after year, decade after decade. Their skin smooth, untouched by sun or sickness, their eyes sharp and bottomless, as if staring into you, weighing what you are worth. Now picture yourself among them. Would you fall to your knees in awe, or would you feel it deep in your gut, the dread, the sense that these creatures weren't blessed but cursed? This is the story of Elias Thorne, a government surveyor, a man of rational mind and restless curiosity, who stumbled into their world. A man who thought he was mapping land, when in truth the land was mapping him. What he discovered in that valley shattered every rule of nature, every illusion of human freedom, and if you stay with me until the end, you will understand why the Beaumont sisters never aged, and why those who lived under their shadow wished they had never seen them at all. But before we descend fully into their trap, I want you to do something. Right now. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I want to know the exact soil, the exact city, the exact corner of the world where you are hearing this forbidden story. Because stories like this, they're not just history. They are alive. They stretch across borders and time, and once you name yourself, once you place yourself inside this tale, you are bound to it. Elias Thorne first entered the valley in autumn, when the trees bled crimson leaves and the air itself felt like a warning. Havenwood, the town was called, a polite, prosperous little community tucked in the hollows of Tennessee, too prosperous. While the rest of the frontier reeled from famine and fever, Havenwood thrived like Eden, but Eden always hides a serpent. The serpent here wore 7 faces. He saw them first in the market, moving like shadows stitched together, their presence bending the air. They never smiled. Their beauty was not warm, not human. It was precise, mathematical, surgical. Looking at them was like staring into a mirror polished too clean. You could see yourself reflected, but something inside you recoiled. The blacksmith told him in a whisper, "They were here when my father was a boy. They looked the same then as they do now." Elias felt the cold realization. If that was true, they should have been in their 60s, even 70s. Yet before him stood 7 women who could have passed for 20. And when he pressed for more, the blacksmith turned, his hands shaking, his voice breaking into a growl. "Some things are not meant to be measured, surveyor. You map the land, leave the souls on it alone." That night, Elias wrote in his journal, "This valley is not blessed, it is contained, and the people, they are not protecting the sisters, they are guarding the rest of the world from them." He should have left then, he should have walked away, but men never walk away from forbidden knowledge. They lean closer, they dive deeper, and so did Elias, and now, so do you. Elias Thorne could not shake the image of those 7 women. The valley seemed ordinary by daylight, but their faces lingered in his mind like a fever dream. The more he tried to push them from his thoughts, the more they returned, like a refrain in a song he had never chosen to hear. It was not lust, not even admiration. It was compulsion, the kind a moth feels for a flame. He had come to measure ridges and rivers, but now the only thing that mattered was the riddle of the Beaumont sisters. The townsfolk spoke of them rarely, and when they did, their voices tightened with fear. A farmer told him in passing that the sisters owned the ridge above the valley, a sprawling homestead untouched by age or rot. Their land was fertile beyond reason. Storms broke before reaching it. Droughts ended at its borders. Wild animals avoided its woods. "Best leave them alone," the farmer muttered, his eyes darting toward the tree line as if the sisters might be listening. "They've always been here, and they'll always be here, that's all you need to know." But Elias was not a man who accepted silence as an answer. Silence to him was not protection, it was conspiracy. And this silence wrapped the entire town like a shroud. Their prosperity was unnatural, no blight, no sickness, no infant graves in the churchyard. Elias had traveled the frontier long enough to know that such fortune was not chance, it was transaction. Something was being paid, and he intended to find out what. He saw them again a week later in the marketplace. They moved together, gliding more than walking, never speaking to others, never breaking the invisible line that separated them from the crowd. Their beauty was suffocating, not because it was inviting, but because it was absolute. Each of them was a variation on perfection, but none smiled, none laughed, none betrayed even a flicker of normal humanity. The crowd parted as they passed, men bowing their heads, women clutching their children closer, not out of reverence, but dread. Elias asked a merchant about their age. The man dropped a crate of apples, his hands trembling, his face pale. He muttered, "They were here when my grandfather was young. They were here when his father was a boy. Don't ask again." And then he turned his back, refusing another word. That night, Elias wrote in his journal again, "It is not piety that keeps them silent. It is fear. This valley is a prison, and the people are both captives and guards." He began to notice things he had missed before. Farmers leaving offerings on stumps at the edge of the ridge, baskets of food, carved trinkets, locks of hair. And the next day, their troubles mysteriously resolved. A sick child well again, a dying crop restored overnight. It was no coincidence. The Beaumont sisters were not hermits. They were the silent axis upon which the entire town spun. Elias's curiosity grew teeth. He wanted proof. He needed to see the sisters' home, the ridge where no outsider went. His chance came sooner than expected, for Elias was not only a surveyor, he was an amateur botanist. And in the woods near the ridge, he had discovered plants that did not belong, ferns with impossible symmetry, moss that glowed faintly in shade, flowers the color of deep ocean, shades he had never seen catalogued. When he asked about these strange plants, the Reverend grew pale. "Don't wander near the ridge," he warned. "The ground there remembers things." Elias pressed further, and the Reverend's voice cracked. "It is not the plants you should fear, it is what tends them." But Elias could not resist. Curiosity is a hunger, and hunger drives men into traps. He packed a satchel with parchment and instruments, a cover for his true mission. He would use the pretense of study to climb the ridge and stand before the Beaumont homestead itself. As he walked the winding path, the air grew unnaturally still. No bird call, no rustling leaves. The forest itself seemed to hold its breath. Then he saw it. A sprawling log house, perfectly preserved, as if time itself had been forbidden to touch it. Its timbers were clean, its roof unweathered, its porch unstained by age. And then the door opened. One of the sisters stepped out, hair the color of autumn fire, eyes like mossy stone. She looked at him as if she had been expecting him. "You are the surveyor," she said. It was not a question. Her voice was both honey and frost. Elias bowed slightly, summoning his courage. He explained his purpose, that he was studying the valley's unique flora. He asked for permission to explore the ridge. She studied him, silent, as if peeling away his thoughts layer by layer. For a moment he thought she might deny him, but then a faint smile touched her lips, cold, practiced. "My sisters and I are fond of nature's rarities," she said. "You may look, but do not stray near the spring, and do not touch what grows by its waters." Her voice did not carry threat, it carried law. And so Elias stepped across the threshold of their land, his every instinct screaming that he had just walked into the jaws of something that had been waiting for him all along. Elias entered their woods with the mind of a scientist, but every step felt more like trespass. The ridge carried its own gravity. The deeper he walked, the more he realized the ordinary laws of nature did not hold sway here. The forest floor was soft, but not with leaves. It was too clean, too precise. Not a single fallen branch lay rotting, not a single insect droned in the air. The silence pressed against his ears until his own heartbeat sounded like a hammer. He knelt to study the flora. At first glance, ferns and mosses, but closer inspection revealed something altogether wrong. The ferns bore fractal patterns too perfect for chance, as if designed by an unseen hand. The moss emitted a faint bioluminescent shimmer, even in full daylight, pulsing gently, like the breath of some buried animal. Elias sketched furiously, his rational mind racing, but another part of him, the part that dreamt, whispered that these plants were not just alive, but aware. And then there were the flowers. He found them near the path leading toward the forbidden spring. Their petals were shades of blue his eyes could barely register, colors that seemed to slip between perception, shifting as he stared. When he touched one lightly with the tip of his pencil, the bloom retracted in a slow, deliberate curl, as though recoiling from his intrusion. He remembered the sister's warning, "Do not touch what grows near the spring." The path bent toward that place. From a distance, Elias could already see the faint rise of mist, curling, pale and sweet-smelling, like smoke from a hidden fire. Against his better judgment, he walked closer. Each step made the air colder, sharper, until his breath hung visibly before him. The scent grew stronger, a strange blend of damp soil, iron and nightshade. At last he saw it, a pool of water so dark it absorbed the light around it. A perfect circle, its edges too seedy. Lean, as though carved by intent. No plants grew within 10 feet of its rim. No insects skimmed its surface. The water was utterly still. Elias crouched at the edge, examining the soil. It was barren, grey, almost ashen. But on the stone nearest the waterline, he noticed something carved, lines interlocking, forming a star inside a circle. 7 lines, 7 points. He traced it with his eyes, feeling a weight press into his chest. It was not Christian, nor Cherokee, nor anything he had ever seen in his studies. It was older, older than language. A voice broke the silence behind him. "I told you not to come here." Elias spun. Another sister stood at the tree line. Her hair was white as snow, yet her face was as unlined, as smooth, as youthful as the others. Her eyes carried no anger, only an ancient grief. "This place is not for you," she said softly. "The water remembers things your mind cannot hold." Elias gestured to the carved symbol. His voice trembled. "What is this?" The sister's gaze dropped to the stone. Her lips parted, barely moving. "It is a lock," she whispered, "and we are the key." Her words struck him harder than any threat. He stammered, "A lock against what?" She looked at him with sorrow deeper than oceans. "The ground here is hungry. It does not know the difference between a root and a bone." The words chilled him more than the air. She was not warning him like a guardian. She was describing a law of nature, one older and more merciless than gravity. Elias backed away, his heart pounding. The sister did not pursue. She only watched, her expression unreadable, her youth glowing against the barren ring of earth. That night, in his journal, Elias scrawled feverishly, "The mystery is not their beauty. It is the lock. They are not preserved by chance. They are components of an ancient mechanism. But for what purpose? To restrain or to unleash?" He barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that black water, that carved sigil, that sister's mournful face. And deeper still, he felt the sense of a trap, that the sisters had not merely allowed him to enter, but had wanted him there. that they were watching him not as an intruder, but as a participant. The next night he crept near their homestead again, and what he saw there destroyed any last illusion that the Beaumont sisters were human. The valley slept, but Elias did not. Curiosity gnawed at him like a parasite. The spring's black water haunted his thoughts, and the sisters' words, the lock, the hungry ground, played in his mind on repeat. He needed answers, and men who hunger for truth often risk being devoured by it. That night, under the cover of a moon veiled in thin clouds, he left his cabin. He moved through the underbrush with the stealth of a hunter, every nerve on edge. The air was unnaturally still, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. He reached a thicket at the edge of the Beaumont homestead. Through the branches he could see their house, sprawling, unrotted, timeless. No lantern light burned in its windows, no smoke curled from its chimney, and yet it pulsed. A faint silver glow breathed from within the wood itself, like veins of light running through living flesh. Then the door opened. One by one the sisters stepped into the night. 7 figures in pale garments, their hair catching the moonlight like threads of gold, raven, and snow. They moved soundlessly in perfect rhythm, as though guided by a single will. Elias held his breath, afraid even the sound of his heartbeat might betray him. They walked to the garden behind the house, a vast patch of earth carved into precise geometric rows. But they did not farm. They did not hoe or reap. Instead, they stood in a wide circle, their arms rising in slow unison. Their hands began to trace shapes in the air, patterns Elias could not follow, loops and sigils too intricate for the eye. And then the earth answered. The soil shimmered, faintly, as if lit from beneath by embers. The plants within the garden shivered, their leaves trembling without wind. The sisters moved in synchrony, weaving motions that bent the air itself. No words passed between them, but Elias felt sound inside his skull, a low, resonant hum, like the vibration of distant thunder, or the tolling of a bell too vast for human ears. He tried to look away, but he couldn't. Their movements were precise, deliberate, as though rehearsed for centuries. The glow within the earth pulsed in time with their gestures. Elias realized with horror that what he was witnessing was not a performance. It was maintenance. They were tending something, feeding something. And then, as one, the sisters dropped to their knees, their palms pressed to the ground. The hum surged, deepening into a rumble that shook the earth. For a heartbeat, Elias swore the soil itself exhaled, a breath of cold mist rising from the garden's center. He clamped his hand over his mouth to stifle a gasp. The sisters rose again. Their faces were serene, untouched by exertion, but their eyes, oh, their eyes. Each pair burned faintly, reflecting not the moon but some inner fire. They turned as one, looking toward the ridge. For a terrifying moment, Elias thought they were looking directly at him. But no, they were looking past him, into the forest, into the night itself, as if sensing the movement of some greater shape in the darkness. After a long pause, they lowered their arms. The glow faded. The earth stilled. Without a word, they returned to the house. The door closed. The silver light vanished. Elias lay in the thicket long after they were gone, trembling, his mind reeling. He had seen proof that the sisters were bound to forces beyond comprehension. They were not simply ageless, they were custodians, prison wardens, or perhaps prisoners themselves. But the quest roared in his mind, what are they feeding? And beneath that, a darker question, why had they let him see? By dawn, the town of Havenwood looked the same as ever. Children played, farmers loaded wagons, women carried baskets to the market. But Elias saw it differently now. This was not a community. This was a system, a living mechanism turning silently around its 7 unaging gears. And Havenwood was not blessed. It was bound. By morning, Elias felt the weight of knowledge pressing down on him like a stone. The valley no longer looked ordinary. Every smiling face, every clean field, every healthy child. He now saw the invisible strings that bound them to the ridge. The sisters were not a rumor whispered in fear. They were the spine of Havenwood, the silent engine that powered its perfection. At first he thought he was imagining it, but as the days passed he began to notice the patterns. A farmer, worried for his prize bull, left a basket of apples at the stump near the forest's edge. The next day the bull was healed, strong and kicking. A woman struggling through a dangerous pregnancy left a carved wooden bird. That night her labor was swift, painless, and her child perfect. A boy injured in a hunting accident was carried to the edge of the woods, his mother sobbing prayers. By dawn, he walked home with barely a scar. This was no superstition, it was an exchange. The townspeople brought tribute, the sisters delivered results. Elias watched it all with growing dread. Havenwood was prosperous, yes, but prosperity had a price. The people never spoke of the sisters, never questioned their gifts. Their silence was not loyalty, it was dependence. The town was addicted to the quiet miracles the sisters provided. And like all addicts, they were willing to ignore the cost. But Elias noticed something else. Not everyone thrived. He began to hear stories, never spoken openly, but muttered in the corners of taverns when the whiskey loosened tongues. A young man, ambitious and restless, had planned to leave Havenwood, seeking fortune in the wider world. On the eve of his departure, he fell from his horse, breaking his leg in a dozen places. He never walked again. Another, a girl with a gift for music, lost her voice to a sudden, inexplicable illness just as she had been preparing to leave for Nashville. Calm. The stories were dismissed as bad luck, but Elias knew better. The valley provided, but it also pruned. The sisters were not simply healers or guardians, they were gardeners, and the people of Havenwood were the crop. Too much growth, too much ambition, too much deviation, and the shears came down. Elias could see it in their eyes now, the hollowness. The men smiled politely, the women carried on their duties, but there was a weight behind their gaze. A quiet resignation. They had traded their freedom for comfort, their futures for security. It was a bargain struck long before their births, and now they were simply tending it, generation after generation. The blacksmith confirmed it when Elias pressed him again, this time about the strange symbols carved near the spring. The man's face hardened. He set down his hammer, wiping his scarred hands on his apron. "You think you're clever, surveyor," he muttered, "but clever men don't last long here. They keep us safe. They keep us whole. You want to upset that balance, then you're the danger, not them." He reached for a hunting knife, running the blade slowly across a whetstone. The sound was deliberate, sharp. "This is your warning. Leave your maps, take your papers, and ride out of this valley, because if you don't, you won't ride out at all." Elias left the forge shaken. The warning was clear. He was no longer simply an observer. He was a threat, and the town would protect its secret as fiercely as the sisters themselves. That night he sat alone in his cabin, the lantern light flickering across his journal. His notes had become frantic, his sketches erratic. He wrote, "This is not protection. It is captivity disguised as prosperity. The sisters are not just the valley's blessing. They are its leash." He should have packed and fled. Any rational man would have. But Elias was no longer rational. Curiosity had become obsession. Obsession had become hunger. He had seen too much to turn away. And beneath it all was a single truth whispering louder each night. If the sisters were the key to the lock, then somewhere within that house was the door. Elias's obsession needed direction. Watching from the shadows was no longer enough. He needed testimony, someone who had brushed too close to the sisters' truth and survived to tell it. The townsfolk avoided him now, their polite smiles stretched thin, their conversations cut short when he approached. But there was one figure who lingered on the edges of Havenwood, respected yet avoided, Agnes Crow, the midwife. She lived in a crooked house at the far edge of town, its shutters always closed, its door always locked. The children whispered that she could deliver babies without touching them, that she saw sickness before it came. Elias knew rumors were often masks for deeper truths. On the third night after his warning from the blacksmith, Elias went to her door. He knocked once. Silence. He knocked again. Still nothing. On the third knock, the door creaked open just an inch, and a thin, lined face appeared in the crack. Her eyes were sharp, wary. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "I need to know," Elias whispered. "About them." Her face hardened, but she opened the door wider, gesturing him inside. The air smelled of herbs and smoke, dried flowers hanging from the rafters. The room was cluttered with jars of roots and powders, books stacked haphazardly, pages marked with symbols he recognized from the stones near the spring. "You've been watching," she said, her voice low. "Foolish man. The longer you stare, the quicker it stares back." Elias sat, his hands restless on his knees. "What are they? The sisters. What holds them here?" Agnes studied him for a long time, her gaze both pitying and cold. Then she spoke. "They were never born, not like you and I. They were made." The words hit Elias like a blow. Agnes leaned closer, her voice trembling as though every syllable carried danger. "Long before this town, long before the church, there were things that walked here, things that drank from the dark places beneath the earth. The ground beneath Havenwood is one such place, hungry, endless. When settlers came, they bled and starved. Then the sisters appeared." "Appeared?" Elias asked. "As if conjured. 7 of them, always 7, always young. They offered a bargain, keep the valley safe, keep its people strong, if the people would keep them bound. They are both jailers and chained. They lock the hunger below, but it locks them as well. That is why they never age. They belong to the ground now." Elias's breath quickened. "And the offerings? The tributes left at the woods?" Agnes's eyes darkened. "Payment, not for the sisters. For what stirs beneath them. The offerings keep it quiet. The rituals keep it sealed. But nothing stays sealed forever. Every bargain frays." A silence stretched between them. Elias's rational mind clung to skepticism, but his bones knew she spoke truth. Finally, Agnes leaned even closer, her whisper barely audible. "The sisters aren't your danger, surveyor. The danger is what happens if they ever falter, if they break. Then the lock opens and the valley won't be the only thing consumed." Elias swallowed hard. "Then why does no one resist them? Why does no one leave?" Agnes's eyes filled with a sorrow so deep it frightened him. "Because you can't leave. Havenwood isn't a town. It's a circle. Roads lead back here no matter how far you ride. People who try, they return or they vanish. That's the part you don't understand." She leaned back, her voice bitter. "You're already caught in it, Elias Thorne. You stepped into the circle the moment you saw their faces." The lantern guttered, casting long shadows across her walls of herbs and symbols. Elias felt the air grow heavier, the way it had at the spring. For the first time since arriving in Havenwood, he wanted desperately to flee, but there was nowhere to go. Agnes fixed him with one last, unwavering stare. "If you want to live, leave them be. If you want to die, or worse, keep digging." That night, Elias lay awake, haunted not only by the sisters, but by the midwife's words. Always 7, always bound, always watching. But sleep would not come, because beneath his fear, a thought grew like a poisonous root. If the sisters were bound, then perhaps they could be unbound, and perhaps he, Elias Thorne, was already playing the part written for him. Elias Thorne had spent his life turning wilderness into lines and measures. He trusted the compass more than scripture, theodolite more than prayer. The world, he believed, could be drawn, gridded, and known. But Havenwood defied his instruments. He began the work quietly. By day, he took the guise of an ordinary surveyor, walking fields, noting ridges, scratching lines on parchment. By night, he laid those lines across each other, building a picture. Slowly, patterns emerged. The valley was no natural bowl. The ridges curved too evenly, the river bent too deliberately. At first Elias thought coincidence, the random favor of terrain. But then he began plotting the locations of the offerings he'd seen, the stumps at the tree line, the altars of stone, the clearings where the farmers left their baskets. When he drew them on his map, his hand froze. They formed a shape. 7 points encircling the valley. A sigil vast enough to encompass every farm, every street, every life within Havenwood. The homestead of the sisters sat at its center, the keystone of the design. He stared at the map for hours, his breath shallow. He knew geometry, symmetry, the natural order of things. This was not natural. This was deliberate. The valley itself was a circle of binding, an inscription carved into the earth at a scale too vast for any single human to build. The sisters did not merely live in Havenwood, they were its heart, its lock, its reason for being. One evening, Elias climbed the ridge again under the pretense of studying flora. He paced the grounds with careful steps, noting distances, angles, horizons. The ridge was not just land, it was part of the pattern, a spoke in the wheel. Every line, every measure, pointed inward, to the spring. The black water. It was the center not only of their warnings, but of the geometry itself. The spring was the door. The sisters were the key. The valley was the prison wall. As Elias traced the lines with his compass, he felt the air shift around him. A pressure, subtle but inescapable, pressed down from the trees. The silence of the woods deepened, a silence that was not emptiness but attention. For the first time, he had the dreadful certainty that he was not mapping land at all. He was trespassing into language, a language older than any scripture, spoken by stone and soil, and the earth was listening. That night, Elias returned to his cabin and laid out his maps, staring at the impossible sigils spread before him. He should have burned them, destroyed every scrap of paper before anyone could see, but instead he inked the lines darker, carving them into permanence. His hand trembled as he wrote in the margins. This is not a town, it is a sentence. The sisters are punctuation, and the spring is the period, the end that waits if the words ever unravel. The lantern hissed low. Outside an owl called once, then fell silent, and then 3 soft knocks at his door. Elias froze. No one came to his cabin unannounced. Slowly he rose, hand reaching for the iron poker by the hearth. When he opened the door, there was no one there. Only a bundle set neatly on the step. A bouquet of the blue, impossible flowers from the spring, their petals shifting in colors his mind struggled to name. A gift, or a warning. And tucked within the stems, a folded scrap of parchment. He unfolded it with shaking hands. In a hand, precise and elegant, only 3 words were written: "We are watching." Sleep came to Elias in fragments, jagged pieces of broken glass that cut deeper each night. He would wake gasping, the sweat on his skin cold as river water, his ears ringing with whispers he could not remember but somehow understood. The dreams were always the same. 7 figures standing at the edge of the spring, their faces blurred, their hair flowing like shadows. They did not speak, yet his own voice would pour from their lips, confessing thoughts he had never dared to write. Dreams of power, dreams of ruin, dreams of leaving this cursed valley behind. But when he woke, the thought of leaving felt impossible, not merely dangerous. Impossible. As though the very idea had been cut from his mind, pruned like Agnes had warned. He would stand at his door, staring at the distant ridgeline, and feel his body rebel. His chest would seize, his legs would lock, his own will stolen from him. By day, the villagers' eyes no longer hid their contempt. Mothers gathered their children when he passed, as if he carried plague. Farmers stopped talking when he drew near, watching him with flat, accusing stares. He heard them whisper the same word over and over as he walked through the square. Outsider. It was as if the entire valley had agreed, silently and simultaneously, that Elias Thorne no longer belonged to the world of men, but was marked, chosen, or cursed. And yet, the sisters were everywhere. He saw them when he turned a corner, always too close. In the market, moving in their silent, synchronized way. In the woods, glimpsed between trees. On the ridge, watching with unblinking eyes. Their presence pressed down on him like a hand on the back of his neck. But worse than their presence was their absence. One evening, he lit his lamp and spread his maps across the table. But when he looked at them, the sigil he had drawn was gone. The ink remained. The lines were there. But his mind refused to recognize the shape. His eyes skated over it like oil over water. He knew something vital was hidden in plain sight, but it was as if his memory had been carved hollow. The parchment in front of him was no longer a map. It was a wound. He slammed his fist onto the table. His body trembled. They were inside his thoughts now, rearranging, trimming, pulling threads. Agnes had been right. Havenwood was a garden, and he was being pruned. That night, the dream returned, but different. This time, the 7 sisters stood not at the spring but in his cabin, around his bed, their hands hovering inches above his body. He could feel them tugging at something within him, something that burned like molten iron, yet slipped through his grasp. One of them leaned close. He could not see her face, but he felt her lips at his ear. "You are already ours." Elias awoke with a scream, his heart hammering against his ribs. His lamp was still lit, but its flame burned blue, unnatural. On the table, his maps had been rearranged into a perfect circle, a pattern he did not remember making. And in the center of the circle, drawn in a hand that was not his own, were the words, "Come to the loom." Elias arrived at Agnes's cabin near midnight, stumbling through the thickets like a man fleeing a fire. His maps were clutched against his chest, though he knew they no longer belonged to him. They had been rewritten, infiltrated, colonized by a hand not his own. The words burned into the parchment, "Come to the loom," echoed in his skull like a tolling bell. He pounded on the old woman's door. "Agnes, for God's sake, open!" The door creaked slowly, and her withered face appeared in the lamplight. Her eyes, clouded with age yet sharp as knives, scanned him. "You look like you've been dragged through the grave and back," she rasped. "They're in my head," Elias hissed, pushing past her into the cluttered room. The air smelled of dried sage and smoke. Jars of strange powders lined the shelves. "I dream of them every night. They move my hands. They write on my maps. I'm losing myself." Agnes closed the door and barred it, her crooked hands trembling just slightly. "I warned you. The sisters do not let questions go unanswered. They answer in ways that break men." Elias slammed the papers onto her table. "What is the loom? They want me there. They've told me so. What happens inside that room?" For a long moment, she only stared at him. Then, slowly, she lowered herself into a chair, her bones creaking. "You should not ask, but you will not stop until you know, so listen carefully, surveyor, for this is knowledge that will cling to you like a curse." Her voice dropped into a whisper, each word carrying the weight of decades. The loom room lies at the heart of their home, a chamber with no windows, no doors save one, always guarded, always silent. Inside it is not a loom of thread, but a loom of flesh and thought. 7 pillars stand in a circle, carved with lines older than the town, older than the first settlers, older than the memory of this land. And between them hangs a web, a lattice of invisible strings. Those strings are lives. Yours, mine, every soul in Havenwood. Elias leaned forward, his mouth dry. "You mean fate?" Agnes's lips curled bitterly. "Not fate. Fate is blind, impersonal. This is choice stolen, reshaped. The sisters weave with precision. They pluck the threads of men and women and bend them toward stillness. The artist becomes a farmer. The wanderer becomes a settler. The rebellious child breaks his leg before he can leave the valley. They prune and prune until nothing grows wild. Havenwood blooms, but only the way they allow." Her words struck Elias like hammer blows. He saw the hollow resignation in the townsfolk's eyes, the way they moved through life as if on tracks they had never chosen. He thought of the blacksmith's threat, of the woman who lost her sister's dream, of the offerings left at the property line. Not blessings, transactions, a contract of control. "Why?" Elias whispered. "What do they gain from it?" Agnes's hands clenched around her shawl. "They feed on it. Every dream that dies, every path diverted, every possibility cut from the vine, it sustains them. That is why they never age. The stolen futures keep them young. They are gardeners of time, harvesters of unrealized tomorrows." The room swayed around Elias. His chest tightened as if unseen hands were wrapping cords around his ribs. He staggered to his feet. Then the loom. It's where they do it, where they weave the cage. Agnes's cloudy eyes glistened with something between fear and fury. "Yes, and once they invite you to see it, Elias Thorne, you are already part of the pattern. The only question is whether you will be thread or shears." Her words hung in the air like smoke, and in that moment, Elias knew, whatever the sisters wanted from him, whatever role they intended him to play in their eternal weaving, it would not be something he could walk away from. The invitation came not with words, but with silence. For 3 days after his conversation with Agnes, Elias saw no sign of the sisters in Havenwood, no flicker of them in the market, no shimmer of them in the woods. The absence was louder than any threat. It was as though the entire valley were holding its breath, waiting for him to decide. On the 4th night, he found his cabin door unlatched. He knew he had locked it. Inside, on his table, lay a single object, a key wrought from black iron, twisted like a branch struck by lightning. Tied to it was a ribbon of pale fabric embroidered with a symbol he had seen before, the 7-pointed star carved into the stone by the spring. He stared at it for a long time. This was no theft of choice. This was command. The key was not given. It was placed. He was being summoned. The path to the homestead seemed longer that night, the air heavier, as if the trees themselves leaned inward to watch him. His hand closed around the small pouch of herbs Agnes had given him, though he felt its protection waning. Each step forward was a defiance of instinct, yet he could not turn back. His curiosity had hardened into obsession, and obsession into compulsion. When he reached the clearing, the house stood waiting. Its timbers gleamed as if newly cut, though Elias knew it was older than any house for miles. Its windows glowed faintly, not with candlelight but with that strange silvery luminescence he had seen before, the glow of something alive, breathing within the walls. The door opened soundlessly as he approached. Inside, the air was cool, unnaturally still. A corridor stretched before him, its floor polished, its walls lined with shelves bearing artifacts that defied origin. A bronze mirror dulled with age, a jar filled with black sand that seemed to move of its own accord, a book bound in leather so pale it resembled human skin. Elias felt the weight of unseen eyes pressing from every angle, but no one came to meet him. He moved forward, each footstep echoing far too loudly. The house smelled faintly of jasmine and iron. He could feel the pull now, not physical but mental, as though invisible cords drew him deeper. He passed one room and saw 6 of the sisters seated around a table, silent, their faces turned toward him in perfect unison. They did not rise, they did not speak, only their eyes followed him, and in their gaze was neither welcome nor rejection, only inevitability. At the end of the hall, he found it, a door carved with the same sigil he had mapped into the valley. The black key in his hand pulsed faintly, warm against his palm, his throat constricted. Agnes's words rang in his ears. Once they invite you to see it, you are already part of the pattern. He placed the key into the lock. It turned with a sound like bones snapping. The door opened inward. What lay beyond was not a room, but a chamber of impossibility. The air shimmered as if it were underwater. 7 obsidian pillars circled the space, their surfaces etched with flowing lines that seemed to move when he was not looking. Between them stretched strands of light and shadow, crisscrossing in layers too intricate for the human eye to follow. It was a web, a loom of living radiance, vibrating with a hum that resonated in his bones. And suspended in the strands were shapes, half seen, half felt. The image of a young boy holding a book, then vanishing as the strands shifted. A woman cradling an infant, her face dissolving into smoke. A man walking toward a distant city, only to be snapped back like a marionette on a string. Futures, possibilities, all tangled, all manipulated, all held hostage within this weaving. Elias staggered forward, his eyes burning. He reached out, almost against his will, and felt the faint brush of one thread against his fingertips. Instantly, a vision seared into his mind, himself standing outside Havenwood years from now, grey with age, a family at his side. Then it snapped, replaced by another, himself buried in the valley, faceless mourners scattering dirt over his grave. Then another, himself walking into the spring, the black water closing over his head. Each thread was a path, and none were his to choose. From the shadows behind the pillars, a figure stepped forward. Seraphina, the red-haired sister with moss-green eyes. She regarded him with that same unnerving amusement, the smile that did not reach her eyes. "Welcome, surveyor," she said softly. "You wished to understand. Now you see. The loom holds every man, every woman, every choice. And now, her gaze sharpened, piercing him like a blade. It holds you. The chamber hummed with an energy that seemed to crawl beneath Elias's skin. He felt it in his teeth, in the marrow of his bones. The web of threads before him vibrated, each strand singing with unseen futures, unseen choices. His pulse thundered. Every instinct told him to step back, to flee, but some darker urge pushed him forward. He raised his hand again, this time not timidly, but with intent. His fingers grazed a strand that shimmered like molten silver. A flood of images struck him at once. A man he did not know, standing at the edge of a cornfield, holding a rifle. A decision hung there, a shot taken or not taken. The man's life, the lives of those around him, split into infinite paths. And in that instant, Elias realized the awful truth. This was not just Havenwood. The loom stretched further than the valley. It touched everything, everyone. Futures bent like reeds in the current, not by chance, not by God, but by 7 silent hands in a forgotten room in Tennessee. He gasped and staggered back, his hand trembling. From the circle of pillars, the sisters began to move, silent, synchronized, flowing like shadows. Each step tightened the air, thickened the hum until it became a roar inside his skull. "Do not touch what you cannot mend," said Ara, her voice soft, sad, and absolute. But Elias's terror twisted into defiance. He lurched forward and seized another thread, this one dark, almost invisible. The instant he pulled, a scream tore through the chamber, not from his lips, but from the strand itself. He saw a child fall into a river, her tiny hands thrashing against the current. Then the vision snapped, replaced by another, the same child, grown, standing on a stage, speaking to a crowd whose faces blurred like smoke. Then another, the girl, older still, lying pale and still in a coffin. He dropped the thread, gasping. His hand burned as if seared by fur. "Eh?" The sisters halted their circle. Seraphina's eyes narrowed. "You see how fragile it is," she whispered. "Each thread is a life, balanced on the edge of becoming. To pluck at it is to wound reality itself." Elias shook his head, his voice raw. You decide who lives and who dies, who prospers, who withers. You hold every man like a puppet. This isn't order, it's tyranny." The chamber pulsed at his outburst. The strands quivered violently, their light strobing, the visions flashing too fast to follow. And then one of the sisters, Elara, her hair white as snow, stepped close, her face calm yet heavy with sorrow. "Tyranny," she murmured. "No, preservation. Without us, this place, this world, would unravel. The threads do not weave themselves. Chaos would devour every path, every choice, until nothing remained but ash. We are not executioners, Elias Thorne. We are custodians." Her hand extended toward the loom, and Elias watched as a single thread glowed at her touch. The vision it carried was of Havenwood itself, the crops, the children, the lives of ordinary men and women. He saw sickness rise like smoke, blight eating through fields, war descending upon the valley. Then, with a subtle shift of her fingers, the vision changed. The town thrived, children laughing, harvests overflowing. The sickness was gone, the war diverted. "You call it prison," Elara whispered, "but they call it peace, and peace has a price." Elias's chest heaved. He thought of Agnes's words. "They prune us. They feed on stolen futures." He looked again at the sisters, their faces as young as maidens, though older than history itself. Yes, they preserved. But for whom? For themselves. For the endless sustenance of eternity. His fury boiled. He reached out and seized 2 threads at once. The chamber shrieked like tearing metal. Visions slammed into him, lives twisting, unraveling, collapsing. His knees buckled, blood filled his mouth, yet he refused to let go. For the first time, the sisters moved quickly, their perfect composure cracking. Seraphina's voice lashed out like thunder. "Enough!" The threads burned in his hands, but Elias clung to them with every ounce of defiance left in him. And then, in the chaos, he heard it. A whisper that was not theirs, rising from the loom itself, from the infinite weave of lives. a voice raw, desperate, pleading, "Free us." The words seared into him, a brand upon his soul. The voice lingered long after the strands slipped from Elias's hands. His palms smoked, his skin blistered, but the pain barely registered. What consumed him was the echo, raw, human, unmistakably alive. "Free us." He staggered backward, clutching his head. "Who said that? Who's there?" The sisters froze, their circle broken. For the first time since he'd entered their home, something like unease flickered across their faces. Ara's mouth tightened. Ilara's hand hovered mid-air. Serafina's eyes narrowed, but beneath her calm veneer, Elias saw it, the smallest crack of alarm. "You heard nothing," Serafina said evenly. "The loom sings with echoes, noise. Do not mistake them for truth." But Elias knew better. The plea had pierced deeper than any illusion. It hadn't been noise. It had been desperate, pleading, human. He spun toward the web of threads. The strands quivered as if in response, vibrating with 1,000 muted voices. If he focused, if he listened hard enough, he could almost distinguish them. Fragments of cries, laughter cut short, whispers choked down to silence. "They're alive in there," he said hoarsely. "The ones you prune, the lives you cut away. You don't just steal their futures, you trap them." Ilara's gaze softened, a sorrowful weight in her eyes. "We do not trap. We preserve what would otherwise be lost. The thread may be cut, but the essence lingers, a mercy, not a punishment." "A mercy," Elias barked, rage surging through the pain in his hands. "To cage them forever in this tangle, their choices stolen, their voices bound. You've turned the dead into threads for your weaving." The chamber pulsed, the strands flickering violently, as though his anger stirred the web itself. Faces shimmered across the loom, fleeting, fragile, vanishing before he could focus. A girl's wide eyes brimming with tears, a man's lips moving soundlessly, mouthing words Elias could not catch. An old woman, her face eerily like Agnes's, staring directly at him before dissolving into light. Elias's knees buckled, his breath hitched. "God help me." Serafina stepped forward, her calm mask sharpened into warning. "You meddle with truths you cannot bear. The loom is not for mortal hands. It was entrusted to us long before you, long before your kind learned to cut stone or till earth. Without it, everything unravels. You think you hear pleas for freedom. What you hear are ghosts of possibility, shadows. If you try to free them, you will tear the weave and everything within it." Her words struck like a lash, but Elias saw through them now. He had glimpsed too much. The sisters spoke not with conviction, but with fear. Fear of him listening, fear of him believing the voices were real. He looked back at the web, the voices rising in faint chorus, 100 threads thrumming with silent pleas. His blood ran cold, but with it came clarity. "They want out," he whispered. "They want me to break it." The sisters moved at once, encircling him with sudden fluid grace, their eyes glowing faintly with a light not of this world. "You will not break it," Elara said, sorrow weighing each syllable. "You cannot break it," Ara added, her voice low and final. But Serafina leaned close, her breath ghosting his ear. "And if you try, Elias Thorne, you will break yourself." The chamber roared to life. The threads shook violently, the visions flashing in dizzying succession. Elias dropped to his knees, the voices growing louder, sharper, desperate. "Free us, cut the web, burn it down." Each voice hammered into him until it felt as if his skull might crack. His heart thundered, his blistered hands twitched toward the loom once more. And in that terrible moment, Elias realized something Agnes had not told him. Havenwood's peace was not the sisters' gift. It was their bargain, and if he severed the loom, he would not just free the valley. He might free the world. Elias did not remember leaving the sisters' chamber. One moment he was on his knees, battered by the voices within the loom. The next he was stumbling through the midnight forest, branches clawing his face, his hands blistered and raw. It was as if the valley itself had spat him out. By the time he reached Agnes's cabin, dawn was bleeding pale light across the hills. He banged on her door with the side of his fist, too weak to shout. The door creaked open after a long pause. "You fool," Agnes whispered when she saw him. "You went inside." He pushed past her, collapsing into the chair by her hearth. His throat burned, his skin trembled with fever, but his eyes, wild, bloodshot, locked onto hers with a fierce, unwavering clarity. "I saw it," he croaked. "The loom, the threads, they're alive, Agnes. Every life they cut away, every choice, every dream, it's all bound in there. They're not gone, they're trapped, and they begged me to free them." Agnes's face blanched. Her hand shook as she set down the cup of tea she had been holding. "Then you've heard the wailing. Few who hear it survive their own mind." It wasn't wailing. Elias leaned forward, his voice ragged but resolute. "It was a plea, and I'm going to answer it. Tell me, Agnes, how do I destroy the loom?" The silence that followed was so thick it seemed the cabin itself was holding its breath. Agnes turned away, staring into the dying embers of the hearth, her shoulders hunched, her frail body trembling under the weight of memories. "You mustn't speak of destruction," she said finally. "The loom is older than Havenwood, older than the sisters. To unmake it is to tear at the roots of the world. You may free the threads, but you may also unravel everything they bind, every harvest, every heartbeat, every dawn that ever comes." "I don't care," Elias spat. His voice cracked, but his fury steadied him. Better the world unravels than it remains their garden, their cage. They are parasites, Agnes. They feed on us, on you, on me, on everyone who's ever breathed in this valley. I won't leave them with their loom. I won't." Agnes's breath shuddered. Slowly she turned back to face him. "You sound like the last one." "The last one?" She nodded. "There was a man, long ago, before my grandmother's time, a stranger, like you. He saw too much, too soon. He tried to cut the loom. They say he struck it with fire, with iron, with his own blood. He vanished. The sisters erased him so cleanly that no one remembers his name. But the ground shook for 3 days after. The river ran black. The cattle gave birth to stillborn calves. That was the price of his defiance." Elias felt a chill crawl down his spine, but he clenched his blistered hands into fists. Then he weakened them. Even if he failed, he proved it can be done. "Tell me what he used. Tell me how." Agnes studied him, her clouded eyes filled with pity. Then, with a trembling hand, she reached into the folds of her shawl and withdrew a small bundle wrapped in oilcloth. She set it on the table between them. Elias leaned forward as she unwrapped it. Inside lay a shard of black stone, jagged and sharp, humming faintly as though it breathed. "This is all that remained after he struck the loom," she said, "a fragment torn from its edge. They call it the weaver's fang. It cuts no flesh, no wood, no iron, only threads. It is a relic of rebellion and a curse. If you use it, Elias, you will bind yourself to its fate. You may cut the loom, yes, but it may cut you in return." Elias lifted the shard. It was cold, unnaturally heavy, and when he held it, the voices returned, faint and eager. "Free us! Free us!" His jaw tightened, his heart hammered with terror and conviction alike. He slid the stone into his pocket. "I'd rather die, a shred of myself, than live as one of their threads," he said. Agnes closed her eyes, as if already mourning him. "Then God help us all, for if you succeed, the valley may never see another spring." Elias left Agnes's cabin with the fang pressed against his chest, wrapped in a strip of cloth to muffle its hum. Each step down the narrow trail felt heavier, as if the earth itself wanted to pin him in place. He told himself it was the fatigue of his wounds, the fever, the lack of food, but in truth, he knew the sisters were already aware. By the time he reached the valley floor, the air had shifted. It was no longer the fresh morning breeze he had known since arriving in Havenwood. It was dense, charged, like the air before a storm that never broke. The townspeople felt it too. Their eyes tracked him with new intensity, no longer hiding suspicion. They knew. A farmer spat into the dirt as Elias passed. A mother snatched her child from the street, clutching him to her chest as if the mere sight of Elias might bring ruin. Their silence was louder than any scream. They weren't protecting him. They were shielding themselves from what he now carried, from what he intended to do. He reached his cabin on the outskirts and barred the door. His pistol lay on the table, freshly cleaned, but it felt like a child's toy compared to the shard pulsing in his pocket. He unwrapped it again, holding it up in the pale light. Its jagged edge glistened like obsidian, but deeper, an absence of light, a void carved into the shape of a blade. The voices whispered, faint but insistent, "Cut, cut, cut." A knock jolted him from the trance, soft, measured, almost polite. He froze, then came the voice, smooth and low, sliding through the cracks in the wood. "You have something of ours, surveyor." Seraphina. Elias's blood turned cold. He said nothing, but the shard trembled in his hand, as if it longed to answer her directly. "You don't understand what you've touched," she continued. "You think it is a weapon. It is a leash, and now it binds you more tightly than it ever bound us." The dirt or creaked, not forced, but opened, as though the lock itself had bent to her will. She stepped inside, her presence filling the cabin like a winter wind. Her hair gleamed like fire in the dimness, her eyes bright with cruel serenity. Elias raised the shard. "Stay back." Seraphina's lips curved, but not in amusement. "Do you believe that thing makes you dangerous to me? It doesn't frighten us, Elias. It tempts us. You carry a hunger that even we cannot ignore." Behind her the shadows thickened, shapes moved, other sisters, silent as smoke, slipping into the room until Elias felt surrounded, 7 pairs of eyes fixed on him, shimmering with predatory calm. "You've already begun unraveling," another sister whispered. Her voice came from the dark corner, but he could not tell which face it belonged to. "We see it in your thread. A fray, a weakness. The fang feeds on you." Elias's hands trembled, but he steadied his breath. "Maybe so. But if I'm unraveling, I'll take your loom with me." The cabin filled with silence. Then Seraphina tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "Then you will have to prove it." And with those words, every candle flame in Havenwood guttered out, plunging the valley into premature night. The night that fell upon Havenwood was not natural darkness. It was absolute, a suffocating absence that seemed to swallow sound as well as light. Elias could still feel the sisters around him, though their outlines were gone, only their eyes faintly glowing in the void. "You believe yourself unbound," one whispered, her voice dripping like honey into his ears. "But every man is already woven." Another voice followed, sharper, crueler. "Every choice you think you made was only a path we allowed. Your obsession, your courage, even your defiance, threads we placed where you would stumble upon them." Elias clenched the shard until it cut into his palm. The pain anchored him. "No. My choices are mine. My blood is mine. You don't own me." The darkness quivered. For an instant he saw it. The loom, towering and infinite, the threads of countless lives tangled and shimmering like a constellation. His own thread burned bright for a heartbeat, then frayed at the edges, pulled by unseen hands. Seraphina's voice slithered close to his ear. "Look at it, Elias. You think you resist us, yet the loom has already begun consuming you. You are nothing more than a borrowed spark." His knees buckled as the pressure mounted, a psychic weight crushing his chest. Visions stormed his mind, roads he had never walked, lives he had never lived, a family left behind, a child that never was, futures stripped away like skin from bone. But beneath the torment, he felt the shard's pulse, steady, insistent. "Cut." He lifted it high, his voice raw. "Then if I'm nothing but a thread, I'll be the one that unravels the whole cloth." The loom shuddered, and for the first time the sisters recoiled. The fang pulsed like a living heart in Elias's hand. The sisters hissed in unison, their calm masks cracking for the first time. The darkness around him thinned, revealing the loom's impossible structure. Threads stretching beyond sight, glowing, writhing, whispering with 1,000 stolen voices. Elias staggered forward. Each step felt like wading through deep water, the air thick, resisting him. The sisters circled, their voices weaving into a chant, a binding meant to paralyze him. His legs buckled, his ribs ached, but he raised the shard high. "Free us!" the threads cried, louder now, desperate. With a roar that was half defiance, half desperation, Elias slashed downward. The shard struck a single glowing strand. The sound was not of fiber snapping. It was a scream, a keening that shook the valley itself. The air split, the ground lurched, windows shattered across Havenwood. The sisters shrieked, their synchronized grace breaking. Seraphina's composure twisted into fury. "You fool! Do you know what you've done?" Elias stared as the severed thread dissolved into sparks, each spark spiraling outward, bursting like stars into the void. And for a heartbeat he felt it, a surge of freedom, vast and intoxicating, like tasting air after drowning. But then the loom groaned, the other threads shivered violently, rippling like a web under strain. Reality quaked. The fang pulsed again, urging him, begging him, cut more, and Elias, trembling, realized he might have unleashed a storm no hand could control. The ground beneath Havenwood split like a cracked mirror. Roads twisted, fences warped, and cattle bellowed in terror as the sky rippled with unnatural light. The people poured from their homes, clutching children, crossing themselves, whispering prayers that dissolved into screams when they realized the stars above were shifting, threads breaking free, tumbling across the heavens like embers from a collapsing fire. In Elias's cabin, the sisters no longer stood as serene figures of mystery. Their beauty curdled into something primal, predatory. Their skin shimmered with fractures of light, as though the loom's breaking bled through them. Seraphina's face twisted with rage, her eyes burning like coals. "You cannot comprehend the balance you've shattered," she spat. "Every crop, every heartbeat in this valley was ours to govern. Now you invite famine, plague, chaos." Another sister lunged, her movements no longer graceful but violent, jagged. Elias swung the fang, the shard's edge humming as it cleaved the air. She halted mid-stride, snarling, her form flickering between human and something older, skeletal, woven from strands of light. The fang had power over them, not just the loom. Elias's chest heaved. He realized in horror and awe that the sisters weren't ageless women at all. They were incarnations of the loom itself, threads given flesh to guard the mechanism. And now, with one cut, he had begun unraveling them too. Their synchronized voices rose, not melodic, but feral, a hunting cry. The predators had been unmasked, and Elias was prey. Havenwood was no longer a town. It was a battlefield. Houses leaned as if drunk, walls bowing inward. The church bell swung without touch, tolling a funeral for the living. The townsfolk scattered through the streets, but wherever they ran, the sisters' shadows followed, stretching impossibly long across the broken earth. Elias stumbled from his cabin, clutching the fang. The villagers saw him and froze, their faces twisted with accusation and terror. To them, he was the spark, the heretic who had invited ruin. "You brought this," the blacksmith roared, his hammer raised. But before he could strike, one of the sisters appeared, her form flickering like smoke. She seized him by the skull, and in an instant his body withered, his thread ripped clean from the loom. The crowd shrieked and scattered. For the first time, Elias saw recognition in their eyes. Not reverence, not obedience. Recognition of what the sisters truly were. Parasites, predators, executioners. Elias ran. The fang pulsed hot against his palm, guiding him, pulling him back toward the ridge, back toward the homestead where the loom waited. Every step cracked the earth further, as though the valley itself wanted to collapse into the abyss. Behind him, the sisters gave chase, their voices no longer soft hymns but shrieks like tearing fabric. They moved faster than any human, flickering from rooftop to tree line, their outlines unraveling as the loom lost its grip. Elias's lungs burned, but the fang whispered its single command, "Cut again." and he knew the end game had begun. The homestead loomed ahead, glowing faintly as if lit from within by a dying star. Its walls warped, beams bending inward, the structure collapsing into the shape of the loom itself. Elias staggered up the ridge, every muscle screaming, but the fang in his hand burned hotter, urging him onward. The door no longer existed. The house had become a gaping wound in reality, its threshold a frame of splintered light. He stepped inside, and there it was, the loom exposed, immense, threads vibrating violently as they strained against collapse. Each strand carried voices, thousands upon thousands, screaming in agony or exhaling in sudden relief as their bonds snapped one by one. The sisters were already there, circling him. Their forms flickered like tattered banners, each face half woman, half thread, unraveling yet still radiant with power. Seraphina stood closest, her fury sharpened into cold resolve. "You will destroy everything," she hissed. "Not just us, not just this valley. The weave holds nations, generations, futures. Tear it apart, and the world will bleed into chaos." Elias's throat was raw, but his voice cut through the roar. "Then let it bleed. Better chaos than chains." The fang pulsed, syncing with his heartbeat, a drum of rebellion. The threads nearest to him quivered, yearning for release. He raised the shard high, the loom's light scorching his vision, burning into his mind. The sisters screamed as one, lunging, and Elias drove the fang into the heart of the weave. The moment the fang pierced the heart of the loom, sound itself died. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath, still, frozen, weightless. Then the explosion came, not of fire or stone, but of unraveling. Threads snapped by the thousands, cascading outward in a blinding storm of light. Elias was thrown backward, his body cracking against the warped floorboards. His vision swam with burning lines, each one a life freed, each one a possibility loosed from its prison. He heard laughter, weeping, screams, prayers, echoes of futures that had been strangled now rushing back into existence. The sisters convulsed, their forms shredded, torn apart strand by strand, no longer women, no longer guardians, only raw threads, screaming as they dissolved into the void they had once commanded. Seraphina's eyes locked on his as her body unraveled, fury mingled with something else, fear. Then she was gone. The homestead collapsed inward, the valley groaned like a dying beast. Havenwood cracked open, swallowed by the earth as reality itself bent and twisted. The townsfolk's cries rose and fell, snuffed out by the storm of unbound threads spiraling into the night sky. And Elias, bleeding, broken, barely alive, laughed. Not from joy, but from the terrible knowledge that he had done it. The cage was broken, the loom was no more. Yet even as freedom surged, he felt it inside him. The fang had fused to his soul. His own thread burned, fraying faster, unraveling with every breath. He had cut the prison, yes, but the price was his place in the weave. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was the storm of threads, scattering into infinity like stars returning to the sky, and a whisper, softer than the rest, brushing his ear. "Now you are one of us."